Dust rose like smoke from the trampled ground, the sun a merciless eye glaring down on the crowd gathered at the auction yard. It smelled of sweat, old leather, and desperation, the kind of place where men measure worth in coin, not in kindness. On the wooden platform stood a woman. Shoulders square, though her thin frame spoke of hunger and long roads. Her eyes, dark as crows, did not flinch as the auctioneer shouted her name like she was a mule up for trade. "You'll regret buying me," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the jeers and laughter the men pressed close. A ripple of amusement rolled through them, as though her defiance were another part of the entertainment. No one in that yard mistook her for meek. That alone made her dangerous in their eyes. At the edge of the crowd stood Eli Hartwell, his hat pulled low, the weight of silence draped over him like a second skin. He was not a man accustomed to gatherings. He lived on the far side of the valley, on land bleached and lonely, where he mended fences and talked only to his horses. Yet here he was, staring up at the woman who dared promise regret. The bidding started low, then faltered. The men laughed, offered half-hearted sums, each looking for a bargain in flesh. She spat on the floorboards near her boots, and the crowd recoiled as though she were poisoned. That was when Eli lifted his hand. His voice, when it came, was quiet, steady. The auctioneer squinted at him, impatient, but the bid stood. Another man tried to top it, more for sport than want, but Eli raised again. There was no flourish, no pride, only a calm determination. In the end, the hammer fell. The woman fixed him with a stare, so fierce it might have split stone. "I warned you," she said, her tone flat as a desert horizon. He met her gaze without a blink. "I'm used to lonely things." The words hung there, odd and unsettling, because they carried no judgment. Not pity, not possession. Just truth. The road back to his ranch was long, the sun dipping low, painting the land in colors of rust and ash. She rode behind him in the wagon, hands clasped tight, eyes never leaving the horizon. Neither spoke. The silence between them was not hostile but heavy, like a field waiting for rain. When the ranch came into view, it looked less like a home than a memory of one. Weathered boards, a sagging roofline, fences leaning like tired men. The barn stood tall but hollow, its emptiness echoing even in the twilight. "This is where you mean to keep me?" she asked, voice brittle, as if testing his resolve. Eli stepped down, unhitched the horses, and said, "Only. It's where I keep myself." She followed him inside, noting the dust on the shelves, the silence in every corner. It was a house stripped bare of warmth, as though no one had laughed or wept there in years. A single lantern flickered, fighting shadows. He set out a plate for her, bread, beans, a small tin of coffee. She eyed it, suspicious of the simple gesture. But hunger won. She ate in silence, feeling his eyes on her without him ever looking up. From outside, coyotes cried into the night, and the wind crept through the cracks in the walls. Mara, she had offered no name, yet her presence filled the small cabin, pushed her plate away. "You think by me gives you peace," she muttered. "You'll find none." Eli placed another log on the fire, the glow catching the hard lines of his face. He didn't answer. Instead, he lit the lantern on the table and slid it closer to her, the light falling gently on her tired features. Then he sat back, silent as ever, the room wrapped in a strange, waiting stillness. And so the night stretched long, the cowboy and the widow bound not by words nor trust, but by the quiet weight of things not yet spoken. Morning crept slow across the plains, pale light spilling over the frost-dusted grass. Mara woke to the hollow groan of wind pressing against the cabin walls, and when she peered out the small window, she saw him, already outside, his back to her, the steady rise and fall of an axe. Each swing split with clean, the rhythm unhurried, patient. He worked as though he had no audience, as though silence itself were his only companion. She watched longer than she meant to, unsettled by his quietness. Men she'd known filled space with noise, boasting or barking orders. This one filled it with nothing. Inside, the cabin felt borrowed, not hers. She moved through it like a stranger in someone else's dream. She cleaned out of habit, not conviction. Dust swept into corners. Dishes rattled in the tin basin. It made little difference. The house remained bare, starved of any softness. At length she muttered under her breath, "Maybe I ought to leave." She wasn't sure if she meant him to hear, but when she glanced, he hadn't so much as lifted his head. That silence was worse than anger. "Why won't you ask anything of me?" she demanded one evening, arms folded tight across her chest. "Why did you even bring me here?" He looked up from the harness. He was mending, eyes shadowed in lamplight. He let the question hang in the air so long she thought he might never answer. Finally, his voice came low, worn smooth like river stone. "Because no one else saw you as worth the trouble." "I did." The word struck harder than any cruelty might have. She had nothing sharp enough to throw back. Instead, she turned away, unsettled, and busied her hands with nothing. Still, she tested him. One night, she burned supper, left the beans in the fire too long, until they smoked bitter. She set the pot down, half expecting the flash of temper she had always known. He filled his plate, chewed slow, swallowed, and nodded once. Food's food. That was all. Another morning, she found her torn shoes sitting by the door, neatly mended, thread still bright from the needle. He had said nothing about it. She lingered over them longer than she should have, feeling something twist tight inside her chest. When neighbors passed, their whispers cut sharper than barbed wire. "He bought trouble. She'll ruin him, you watch." She held herself stiff when she heard it, bracing for him to step aside, let the shame rest on her shoulders alone. But Eli never did. Once, when the words drifted loud enough to sting, he moved closer, his stance plain. He had chosen her and would not flinch. She hadn't known how much such a quiet defense could undo her. In the evenings she took to tending the patch of garden behind the barn. At first, it was defiance, proof she needed no man's hand. But as the soil broke beneath her palms, something else stirred. She found herself humming, soft and low, old tunes her mother once sang when the world was gentler. She thought no one heard. Yet one dusk, glancing back, she caught Eli pausing in his work, his eyes closed as though the melody carried him to a place he thought he'd forgotten. The outside world pressed harder than her own doubts. One afternoon, Jedediah Crane rode up, his fine coat dusty, but his smirk polished. He leaned against his saddle horn, looking her over like a piece of cattle. "Eli," he called, "a man as quiet as you don't need trouble shadowing your door. Sell her off. I'll give you fair price. Take her where she belongs." Heat flared in her cheeks, humiliation laced with fury. She waited for Eli to yield, because hadn't men always yielded to men like Crane? But Eli straightened from his work, eyes leveled, voice like iron wrapped in calm. "She stays." Crane chuckled, but something in Eli's steadiness silenced further mockery. Mara said nothing until long after the man had gone. That night, while Eli slept in his chair by the fire, she took his torn shirt into her hands. In the flickering glow, she stitched it clean. She could not say why. The days stacked, ordinary as fence posts, yet the distance between them thinned. When a storm broke sudden over the valley, wind tearing at shingles, rain clawing to the roof, they moved together without thought, lanterns shifting, buckets catching leaks, shoulders brushing as they laughed at the futility of it. For a breathless moment between lightning strikes, she saw his face softened by something like joy, and found herself smiling back before she could stop it. Later, in the dark of her bed, the rain still whispering on the roof, she lay awake. "Maybe," she murmured into the silence, "he don't want to own me. Maybe he just wants me here." Her own words startled her, for they sounded dangerously like hope. The summer came dry as bone, the kind of heat that shimmered over the earth, until even the cattle grew restless, lowing its shadows. Dust hung in the air like a veil, and every step across the yard cracked the ground beneath. Mara felt it in her chest, the taut waiting, as if the land itself braced for something about to break. Eli sensed it too. She saw in the way he lingered near the barn, checking harnesses twice, running his hands over fence rails as though he meant to anchor them against what was coming. Trouble wore a man's name, Jedediah Crane. His bitterness had festered since Eli turned him aside. Neighbors spoke of him gathering men at his table, filling their ears with poison. That Mara was cursed, that Eli had bought himself a burden, that she was another man's ruin come to finish what she started. The whispers thickened until Mara could feel them clinging to her skin whenever she rode into town. She met them with her chin high, but inside, the shame twisted sharp. She half expected Eli to regret every coin he'd spent on her. Yet when her eyes searched his face, he gave her only that same steady calm, as though the noise beyond their land could not reach them. The night of fire began with a stillness, so heavy it pressed against the lungs. Mara woke first, a sharp, acrid sting filling her nose. Smoke. She jolted upright, heart thrashing. Outside, the barn glowed with a terrible orange light, flames racing up the rafters like wild things set loose. The horses screamed. Eli was already moving, pulling boots on, grabbing the water pails. "Stay here," he barked, voice rougher than she'd ever heard. But she was out the door before he finished, skirts clutched high, the heat slapping her skin. They plunged into the choking smoke together. Eli cut the ropes with his knife, driving terrified horses toward the open air. Mara threw herself against the latches, coughing, eyes streaming. A beam cracked overhead, showering sparks. For a breath, she was trapped in the glow, unable to move. Then Eli's arm closed around her waist, dragging her clear as the roof groaned and fell. She heard him shout her name, not in command, not in warning, but raw and desperate, breaking the silence he carried like a shield. They stumbled into the night air, both of them streaked with soot, hands blistered, lungs heaving. The barn roared behind them, flames swallowing what could not be saved. But the horses lived, stamping wild in corral, and the two of them stood together, scorched but unbroken. Neighbors came at dawn, drawn by smoke. They saw Mara with her arms raw from rope burns, eyes rimmed red from smoke, yet steady with fire their own. They saw Eli beside her, shirt blackened, jaw set like stone. And whatever poison Jedediah had poured into their ears the weeks before, it withered against the truth of what they had witnessed. Crane himself appeared at the edge of the gathering, but when no one echoed his laughter, he turned his horse and rode off into the distance, smaller with each beat of hooves. That night, the ranch sat in silence except for the crackle of embers. Eli lowered himself onto the porch steps, his hands trembling faintly from exhaustion. Mara sank beside him, shoulders brushing his. For a long while they watched the sky, stars burning bright above the smoke. Then Eli's voice came, softer than she'd ever heard. "I told you I'm used to lonely things." His gaze stayed fixed ahead, as though the word were too fragile to be looked at. "I don't want to be any more." Her throat tightened. She leaned her head against his shoulder, her silence this time not defiance but answer. He shifted just enough of their hands to find one another, rough palm against rough palm. No vows spoken, yet more binding than any paper. The land would bear scars from fire, but scars meant survival. The house still stood, and so did they. Some folks think love comes like thunder, loud and sudden, shaking the ground. But I reckon it most often arrives like a lantern in the dark, small, steady, held out by someone who refuses to let you stumble alone. If you've ever felt cast aside, called trouble, or told you weren't worth the burden, remember this. Even the loneliest heart can be chosen, and even the fiercest soul can find rest.